job that has been done by the Deputy Chair in allowing the Chairperson, the Minister, Deputy Minister, the President of SALGA to set the tone in the morning in this very important calendar week in the National Council of Provinces. As they've set the tone in the morning, it's a continuation of what they've done, the good work. Without much ado, I will take this opportunity to invite Auditor General, Mr. Makwetu, to deal with the key intervention to improve local government outcome. We know that from time to time when we invite the AG, it's always available. They have set the tone in the morning with the continuation of what they've done, is the good work happening in our departments, SOE. I will take this opportunity, the maximum, to invite the National Council Auditor General.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I also want to greet all the leadership present in this session today. Chair, I know that I have a bit of a tricky challenge today because I often come here in this session to share the work that we do as an audit office. But I realize now today I'm actually placed in a different position where I need to operate in your terrain, as it were. But I'll try my best to share some thoughts that I have with regards to some of the key issues that local government could be focusing on. I have a presentation. I'm not sure if the person assisting me has already got it. There it is. If I start with the whole question of the audit outcomes value proposition as a start, just to repeat the point as to what these audit outcomes are often about. And I think in our view as an audit office, they tend to give us an indication of the general governance environment within which municipalities operate. However, when we get to audits that we classify as clean, they are the types of audit outcomes that also give us an indication of a well-governed environment, where we find good risk management and strong internal controls, and I'll speak to this at a later stage. But it's also an environment, Chair, where management often prides itself with accurate information that they present to their councils to facilitate accurate decision-making. But it also creates a foundation for the ability of municipalities and local government to deliver on its promises. Whereas on the other side of the extreme, when we don't have such an audit outcome, it also raises some warning signals, as well as the red flags that we need to respond to. But the big thing for us as well, when we don't achieve a clean audit, we are often confronted by an institution that does not have a strong grip on its financial affairs. And that, Chair, could be a fertile environment for those that want to divert these limited resources elsewhere to succeed. So, Chair, our view when we look at this audit outcome, it's certainly a view that speaks to some of the opportunities that get lost. And I think the speakers that spoke before lunch have gone to great length to describe what this often does to many of our municipalities. And I thought, Chair, as I'm speaking to the rest of the leadership in local government, it will also be instructive of me to look closer to some of the provisions in the Constitution. And I thought, yeah, I will probably just stay with one of those provisions, and that is the provision speaking to the origins of the Treasury control. And Treasury control, by it, I mean the type of disciplines that need to be put in place to make sure that the money we receive, we account for, that the money we spend, we can identify and account for it, which means that all spheres of government, as required by this section of the Constitution, are required to set a set of financial controls. So when we speak to the issue of financial controls at any stage, Chair, we are often borrowing from the instructions in the Constitution rather than from the disciplines of auditing. I think it must be quite firmly put out to say that, including the issue about the responsibilities and penalties that are attached to accounting officers and political heads, all of those derive from Section 216 of the Constitution. So whenever we speak about glaring lack of consequences or there are no controls to manage these resources, it comes from that Treasury provision in our Constitution. So I think we've got a very clear foundation from which we draw, shall I say, inspiration when we do our audit work, as well as when we make our findings in respect to the audits that we do. But I'd also like to turn my attention to one of other key foundational documents that have set out way back in 1998 some of the key policy objectives, particularly in the area of finances in local government. And that was articulated in the white paper on local government, where among other foundational elements and one of the key tenets of the formation of local government structures as we know them was the issue of the adequacy and certainty of revenue. And we've seen as we navigate through various municipalities' financial statements that there are generally two sources of revenue, and it's the own revenue generated as well as the intergovernmental transfers. And of course, the white paper, when it envisaged the setup of local governments, it also dealt with the need for municipalities to be encouraged to fully exploit these sources. And I've already learned from the earlier presentations that there are many difficulties that are encountered with regards to generating own revenue due to various economic constraints. However, to meet the development objectives, the white paper did say that there shall be two places from which we should look in respect to the generation of revenue. The Deputy Minister of Finance also spoke to some of the limitations in regards to the fiscus, because as you can imagine, this was dreamt of some 20 odd years ago, and so many years have passed. And I think at that stage, if one looks back to the white paper, it was talking about a total basket of resources, somewhere around 5 billion at that time, that were earmarked for local government in terms of the intergovernmental transfers. And if you look today, the Deputy Minister was talking about something in the order of 126 billion, which means over these 20 years, there's been a significant shift from those earlier years in respect to the resources, the growth of needs, as well as the growth of many communities that have now relied largely on the transfers that come from government. The other principle that I thought, Chair, is also quite important and relevant for purposes of issues of managing finances is the area of sustainability, whereby, again, the point was emphasized about the need to balance budgets. That remains a critical issue because those resources, once income has been raised, it was felt that that income must be able to adequately cover expenditure. But I'm sure if you look at the financial statements that we audit, in most instances, that is not the case. It's actually the other way around. Expenditure tends to exceed the level of revenue that we are able to generate. And also the other reality also is the fact that we need to find ways to find affordable ways of drawing into our institutions different services so that we can be able to cover the costs of service delivery. Another one principle which I thought is important, Chair, the last two, would be the effective and efficient use of these resources. It has been highlighted a number of times in our audit work that we do not necessarily find this in place all the time. But lastly, the area of accountability, transparency, and good governance was also cemented earlier on as one of the greater areas of focus that must be embedded in our local government institutions. And I think if we can look to what informed these four key areas, and they're not the only ones, there are many others. Others have to do with sharing and cross-subsidizing in areas where others are not able to fund those for themselves, hence the development of indigent policies and all of those things. So on our side, Chair, one of our key things that we look at in the audit office is largely the last bullet. But I was also alerted to the fact that there's no need for me to repeat the audit outcomes that you had in July, because I'm sure there was a big splash out of this narrative as far as the audit outcomes are concerned throughout the month of July. And even in the most recent times, we hear a lot about these audit outcomes. But let me quickly get on to one of the developments, Chair, that the Minister of COGTA spoke about. And we developed this slide when we were tracking the development of the district development model, and said to ourselves, one of the things that must not be forgotten when this development model is taken to implementation is the importance of putting in place preventative controls. So far, we have seen launch of 3 of these pilots. The one that the minister spoke about at Waterberg. There was another launch at OR Tambo in the Eastern Cape, as well as in KwaZulu-Natal. And our sense was that as an audit office, if one wants to succeed in putting together this district development model, we should bring along preventative controls, because here we are going to combine the integration of local municipalities together with metros in certain cases, national and provincial departments that will weigh in on making sure that there is an integration and a cross-government delivery of various programs. But the reality is that when we looked at many of these institutions individually, before the district development model came about, they were individually showing significant weaknesses when it comes to matters of accountability, as well as financial rigor, and their ability to report transparently on their financials. And so it is important that when they get put together into a coordinated model, the importance of bringing forth controls that will prevent the type of things that we have picked up in an audit in the past years will remain very important. And I think you'll see on the slides here where we show the type of preventative controls that need to be incorporated even in these 3 districts that have already been launched, so that we can use them as a test in terms of how do we make sure that we prevent issues of supply chain from becoming multiplied in a coordinated development model. How do we prevent a situation where the financial management discipline does not pass the test with regards to the scrutiny of an audit office? And that's what we meant when we said that let us superimpose and put in place a set of preventative controls up front as we are configuring and redesigning the district model. And I was happy when Minister Dlamini Zuma spoke to the recent visit at Waterberg, where it is not only just the people in that municipality, but there are others who come with financial, engineering, and other skills that are necessary to build a formidable district model. And of course, all of these things, Chair, when they get done, they require stronger coordination between the different elements that come together into these districts, because they are not necessarily going to be easy just because there are more players at the table. They will probably introduce their own challenges when it comes to preventative controls as well as the disciplines of financial management. And I think it's something that needs to be flagged in the context of the journey towards institutionalizing these district institutions. But on the next slide, Chair, I thought one of the key things for me that stood out over the years as we are looking at the audit outcomes is that in our government, whenever the audit outcomes are released, we tend to try and develop strategies to address that outcome specifically. By that, I mean, if there's a concentration of disclaimers, then we put all our effort into trying to deal with the disclaimers. I understand where it comes from. If we've got unqualified audits with some findings, we tend to do nothing because we think we are not in danger. When we confronted by qualified audits, which means the financial statements are not reliable, we also tend to put a lot of resources in there. But here's something, Chair, that I thought will be quite key, and I think it builds on the issues that Minister of COCTA spoke about. And also, I think the president of SALGA also spoke to it. That in most municipalities, and I'm sure there are a few that can pass this test, when you receive funds, whether it is the intergovernmental transfer or your own funds, it is very seldom, Chair, that you find proper project plans being developed at a municipal level. For me, the development of project plans, including implementation plans for those things that have been budgeted, for those things that have been put in our SPDI documents, we sometimes never react as an institution by saying, here is an amount of a budget of 20 million, for argument's sake, for a municipality. What is the plan? What are the resource requirements, both in terms of the people who are going to implement that 20 million project, so that the council of the municipality can give consideration to the necessary resources that are needed, both human as well as project management resources that are needed to make that particular project achieve that which was intended when it was budgeted for. And I think that is the beginning of a journey for us, Chair, to build transparency and accountability for the monies that get sent to local government. Because in most instances, we only leave this at a point when we have submitted the budget, get the approval for the budget, and spend it. But nobody exercises oversight over what triggers the expenditure. Again, going back to this 20 million example, this 20 million example, if it is meant to be building a water treatment plant, as an example, before that money is released to those people who are going to oversee the implementation of that water treatment plant, the suggestion that I'm putting across is to say, put the plan on the table. Who's going to implement this? How is the procurement of this particular water treatment plant going to be implemented? Have you taken into account all the issues that need to be prevented in order not to incur irregular expenditure? Has Council had a look at that particular plan, which is a micro plan at an institutional level, which is about providing transparency for the implementation of various projects, so that there is proper feedback and proper report back via the council and the accounting officer? For me, that is the beginning of this transparency, Chair, which will start looking at the stuff that causes audit failure, the stuff that causes fruitless and wasteful expenditure, because it will possibly be handled directly by those that are charged with oversight in the institution, because the funds are available in terms of having been allocated in the budget. But the point I'm raising here is that a preventative measure is to say we shall release that 20 million rands that you want to spend on the water treatment works only after you have clearly articulated the plan, as well as how long is it going to take to build or to refurbish that water treatment plant. Then after we have satisfied ourselves as council, we shall feel happy that you can then go ahead and get that 20 million funding. And it's not something that is going to happen interinstitutionally. It is contained within that institution. And if the proper levels of oversight and you bring the impacts into the equation, even before the financial statements are a subject matter, you should be able to get a number of people who are going to weigh in on that project and be able to make sure that the safeguards and the preventative controls are put in place. Because a project implementation plan like that will normally come with milestones as well as the objectives for which this particular project would have been agreed, looking towards the benefit that will be derived by citizens, rather than trying to implement this with one of your eye looking to the auditors. The auditors will find a mechanism and a place where there's proper accountability and transparency if these existing structures in the institution begin to embrace the discipline of accountability and transparency, not only through project implementation, but also through various services that are provided by municipalities. And I think for us, the big thing is that when monies arrive, we just spend and hope for the best. But hoping for the best sometimes leads to many of these projects never being complete. Hence, roads that are done and sometimes they lead to nowhere after 3 times what was envisaged has already been spent. And for us, Chair, that is probably one area to look at how to deal with audit outcomes, because this is not an isolated focus on the scoreboard of the audit office, but it becomes a preoccupation for achieving the objectives for which the budgets are put out, but the issue of managing them transparently will become a lesser problem when auditors know that you've got all the documentation and you've got all the people who exercise oversight, and every single project is articulated, signed off, and overseen at the right level under the watchful eye of council and an accounting officer. And I think that perhaps one of the things that will be important to also consider is the fact that I have compared notes on this idea with the National Planning Commission. And one of the key issues they have identified as to why many of the projects never go far, they have also diagnosed the whole glaring weakness around the planning discipline. And we think that the planning discipline, as the minister said earlier on, has got both short, medium, and long-term objectives. And what I'm talking about now is predominantly the short and medium-term focus. Because clearly, if the National Planning Commission is focused on assisting with developing plans, they will probably be one of the institutions to look at to reinforce the existing activities that are already taking place in the rest of government as we know it. So the big point for me on this one then, Chair, is that the plans and the articulation of a proper planning system in local government ought to be raised, because without it, it's very difficult to answer even to some of the audit findings, because a lot of the people that ought to have been part of this sometimes end up focusing on other things when projects do not go far. However, monies get spent and finished without any requisite value being derived from those projects. And so the point then flowing from that, Chair, is that as an office, we have committed ourselves and we are working with the National Treasury, and we are launching a set of preventative control guides that we have developed over the last few months, which control guides are dealing with the area of supply chain, which are dealing with the area of contract management. They are dealing with payments. and many other disciplines that find themselves through the systems of local government. And what we will be launching tomorrow will begin to trigger the necessary conversations in many of the institutions that we audit. One of those, for example, is a preventative control on the tone and control culture of the institution. It is not prescriptive. It's not a guide that prescribes what people must do to set the tone and the right culture. But it also is addressing the controls that should be in place at an organizational level to enable an ethical and effective control culture, including leadership effectiveness and conduct. We've developed those guides. We are launching them tomorrow with National Treasury, and we are hoping that they will find their way into local government as well, because they are as important for local government as they are for national and provincial departments. We are also looking at a set of controls, Chair, that focuses on institutionalized internal controls. These ones deal with the ability to implement and monitor and provide assurance on various programs. And that's the one I was talking about earlier, including those that respond to transaction level controls. And again, going back to my 20 million example, if there are a set of transactions that are going to be part of that 20 million, and we discover that part of what has been put in that 20 million implementation budget for water treatment works, we, for example, find there's a 2.5 million set aside for some consulting services. That is where the people who scrutinize that implementation plan are going to start asking the question, what sort of consulting service do you envisage in the context of an implementation of a water treatment works? What sort of procurement activity are you going to undertake? Is this going to be done by people internal to the institution, or is it going to be done by support from others outside of the institution? And lastly, a set of controls again around project management. And we know this is not a quick fix. It will find resonance in the institutions also in the long term, but it also deals with the issues that most municipalities face up to. And we think a combination of this reorientation of thinking away from trying to address a disclaimer or an adverse opinion in isolation, it probably will be better placed if it is dealt with upfront and it is put in place as a preventative measure. So that, Chair, when the audit office pronounces on the audit outcomes, then the institution should be in a position to say, let's go back to those preventative controls. Let's take an example again of this 20 million water treatment works. If in the water treatment works expenditure, we find that there are significant issues of irregular expenditure that were found by the auditors, at least we know who to ask. We know which councillor was responsible for the oversight over this particular project, and we are not going to be subjecting everything to a further investigation with additional costs and resources, when in fact there are people who were put in charge at a political level to see to it that the delivery, the costs, as well as the project implementation were done in accordance with the agreed protocols and positions of council. And for us, that is how one best positions an institution to proactively manage the outcome of audits without having to look at the set of financial statements to be able to do that. And the other point, Chair, which I thought I would also share, is the development on our side of a system of evaluating financial management in various municipalities across the country, which we do on a quarterly basis. And we call that program a status of records review, where we look at the different disciplines within a municipality prior to the financial year end, focusing on an engagement with an accounting officer, the chief financial officer, heads of supply chain, and those type of people, with a view to scrutinizing the records as they are developing, so that we don't find ourselves reporting things that ought to have been dealt with prior to the books being closed. at the end of June. And in essence, that to us is some of the things that we believe local government ought to embrace, because in essence, as we look through all of the financial statements of these institutions, we are of the view that prevention is so much better than healing, because it saves the labor of being sick. And I think if one looks at all of the 257 municipalities that we looked at, Chair, when we think about them, we also thought to ourselves as an audit office, how come that we do not, as a sector, think about local government into the long term? Have we ever taken a long-term view as part of our navigation into the future to say, how do we want to reimagine local government as a sector in our country? Let's just take an example, Chair. We've got 257 municipalities across the country. Each one of them has got a supply chain management department, sometimes strong, sometimes not very strong. Each one of these municipalities has got its own HR and payroll department. It's got its own finance department. It's got its own asset management department and many other departments that you can think of, multiplied 257 times right across the whole of the country. And if you look at the landscape, and we are thinking that perhaps this is something that the leadership in local government must think about. And the question is, we understand that it came from the propositions that were captured in the 1998 white paper, but we have already had 20 years experience of this journey. And the question is, does it serve the purpose of reaching out to the citizens, the various programs and projects, to have a configuration like this? Because a configuration like this requires 257 different audit teams. It requires possibly 200 odd different consultants, and so on and so forth. And therefore, the bulk of the limited resource that the Deputy Minister was talking about is already channeled to a huge bill of administrative activities, even before it is translated into the tangibles. So our sense in thinking about this in the long term is to say to local government, maybe we have reached a point, even if it's not going to happen now, it may happen into the long term. The question is, are we putting in place all the right and the necessary administrative support functions to achieve the objectives of local government? We believe that it is not a lazy conversation to have. I think it's a necessary conversation to have, because it is in the configuration of these different administrative support functions that support local government that we will be able to find some of the issues of economies of scale. By this I mean, if, for example, we think about payroll in local government as an example, payroll, Chair, is supposed to be a uniform function that is predictable, at least in a 5-year space of local government. There are not so many different things that happen in payroll. And the question is, if you've got 36 municipalities in a province, why do you have 36 different payroll departments? Why do you have 36 different water-related and infrastructure departments in the same province, let alone the fact that the province itself has got its own other capabilities? And why do you also have 36 different road and transport development and infrastructure units sitting in the different 36 municipalities, which will also be required to be reported on? But I think the same goes for the optimization of the utilization of assets. Most times, if you look at the balance sheets of all these municipalities, they carry major assets that run into billions of rands. Some of them are old, some of them are new, but there's never space for anybody to appraise the quality of these assets so that they can be maintained proactively, so that you can prevent water losses, and so on. And so I do think that the issue of the thinking about the centers of excellence in our configuration in the long term is possibly something that requires to be thoroughly researched and thoroughly studied over a period of time, so that there's no need for 37 different places where the same thing happens in a small province. even if it's a large province, there may be a combination of things that can grow from the articulation of the district model, among other things. So, Chair, I think that the last points that I'm raising are predominantly just a challenge for us to begin to reimagine issues around the configuration of the administrative support functions that make local government work, because the way that they are now, we're just tweaking them as we go, but it never translates into any real financial benefit. Hence, the constraints in the fiscus, if they are going to be with us for another decade or more, then these problems definitely, regardless of what the audit outcomes are also not going to go away. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Makwetu. Thank you, Auditor General. It's always nice listening to you, making us to understand our role and what is the situation on the ground and the challenges and the possible way forward. Without much ado, we are so fortunate that we have this local government week, 3 presidents, 2 former presidents of SALGA and the current one. So I'll invite the Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Regional Affairs, Honorable Tau, who will present developing a framework and tool to improve the quality of the outcome of interventions in local government. And Honorable Tau will even assist us to understand the challenges of people that are at the coalface of service delivery, as at some stage it's a product of that situation, and it was once a president of SALGA, and like our chairperson Orana Masondo, who has set the tone, was the first president of SALGA, instead of us just theorizing. Honorable Tau, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Let me join in greeting the Chairperson of the NCOP, Deputy Chairperson, Minister Dlamini Zuma, and all colleagues present, including, of course, my fellow panelists, the Auditor General. I thought it would be important as we enter this conversation to preface the conversation with what I think is an important statement made by, amongst others, the renowned and celebrated David Harvey, who in his own right is a critical thinker on matters related to local government, but amongst others, a philosopher. And his argument, and I quote, that the right to the city is far more than the individual liberty to access urban resources. It is a right to change ourselves by changing the city. It is, moreover, a common rather than an individual right, since this transformation inevitably depends upon the exercise of a collective power to reshape the processes of urbanization. The freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves is, I want to argue, one of the most precious, yet most neglected of our human rights. I borrowed, Chairperson, from this quotation simply to place in context the need to respond to the challenges that we are confronting in the cities and in our municipal areas within the context of our history. The fact that the people of this country do not, at this point, cannot comfortably say that they adequately enjoy the rights to their cities and towns, the rights to their villages, or in fact, inadequate access to services, inadequate access to development, and inadequate access to opportunity is indicative of people not having adequate access to what is indelibly their rights that they should be enjoying. I won't go through these first few slides, simply to indicate that we come from a history where our cities developed at the back of institutionalized racism, but before the institutionalized racism that defined our cityscapes and structure, were a colonial era in which people experienced access to opportunities in cities based on them developing at the back of colonization and therefore segregation. This, of course, was followed by the apartheid era, which institutionalized racism and the racial structure of our cities and entrenched through brick and mortar inadequate access to the rights that people should have to their cities. And houses were built in far-flung places outside where urban opportunities are, and governance and access to services was inequitable in our cities. And of course, we've come to an era where 25 years ago, we made a commitment. We made a commitment in the first instance, in the interim phase, that we should build a local government system that meets the needs of our people. We inevitably made a commitment that we also need to ensure that we redefine all patterns of settlements in our cities, that we're able to undermine the apartheid morphology of our cities. And through this, we developed, amongst others, the National Spatial Development Perspective. And we should reflect on the challenges that have led to the implementation of this. We've developed our IUDF as a means of implementation of urban policy in the country, and the National Spatial Development Framework has been developed. And here, I'm simply indicating the varied levels of successes and challenges that we've confronted, the varied levels of progress that we've made in certain instances in addressing spatial redress and ensuring access to services within, in fact, the entrenchment of apartheid spatial patterns in certain instances through the way in which we've developed housing opportunities for people in our cities. So in essence, when we are talking about how then do people access their rights in cities, we're talking about access to developmental services. So the way in which we deliver services and the delivery model needs to be developmental in its nature. It's about a right to spatially integrated cities, a right to livable municipalities where people have access to good quality life, clean air, safety, and cultural experience. It is about the right to inclusive economic growth, and indeed it is about the right to remake ourselves in our respective municipalities. And I borrowed this from an earlier input that I'd made in the city of Johannesburg around how we can ensure that we create a right to the city. Now that was really a preface to what the mandate was to our discussion, but I thought it's important to preface our discussion within the development context, because indeed we govern and we lead communities in our respective municipal spaces, and indeed in the country with the purpose of ensuring that we meet the development needs of our people and confront our development challenges. But for us to confront these challenges, we need to deal with the institutional problems that inhibit our ability to adequately meet these objectives. I was given the mandate this afternoon to speak about developing a framework and tools to improve the quality of outcome of interventions in local government. And the emphasis is, we're already acknowledging that, in fact, we need to intervene in certain instances. But we're in this statement making an acknowledgement that these interventions have not yielded the results as we had designed. So the question becomes, how do we then improve the quality of the tools that we put in place to ensure that such interventions are able to yield results? On its own, the topic is a definition of a problem statement and a call to action to say, what then should we do in our response? In many ways, I categorize the nature of problems that we face in local government to be defined by three interrelated issues and challenges. The first set of challenges relates to governance issues, and I think Director General has succinctly captured some of the issues that we deal with when we're engaging on governance matters. Issues of the control environment, issues of the political decision making, issues of management and administration, issues of supply chain management processes, and a whole range of those issues that require attention. And this leads to, when you have inadequate controls, you create susceptibility to malfeasance in any system. So in essence, the focus on governance and controls is a particularly important issue. So we define that as part of the problems that we're confronting. We also have the problem of fiscal and financial issues that confront local government. And both the president of SALGA and the minister reflected on this in their earlier presentations, including DM Masondo, when they spoke about the financial challenges that confront local government, a lot of them not out of their own making, and in certain instances as a result of the design of the system. So sometimes when we're talking about the need to intervene, sometimes we do not always acknowledge that in fact we have designed a municipality that's not going to be financially viable. So in this instance, we find ourselves in a situation where we deploy section 139, whichever section of 139, but the result is not yielding positive results because in essence, we are using the wrong tool to confront what the problem is. But then there are also systemic issues in local government, and these systemic issues have to do with the way in which we have designed the system, the way in which we have overregulated the system, the way in which we have created an environment in which you need to overlay multiple systems into the governance framework of local government, but also the way in which we've made certain decisions that I'll reflect on a bit later in the presentation. There are a number of disturbing statistics that we should be worried about. Chairperson, I'm sorry, I just went to the wrong slide or the wrong button rather to reflect on this problem. So if I may just quickly go back to the slide that I was talking to. But I was saying, Chairperson, without talking to the slide itself, that there are a number of issues that we confront in the local government system, which issues have to do with, amongst others, the increase in the number of municipalities that are facing significant financial challenges. And we need to confront this and ask ourselves the question, what is the cause of this significant increase of municipalities with significant breaches in meeting their financial obligations? We have a huge number of municipalities that are in a financial crisis, with almost an equal number of those municipalities having adopted unfunded budgets. So in essence, the revenue does not match expenditure, or expenditure is much higher than revenue. And therefore, by the time the municipality spends, according to their budget, they're already spending money that they do not have. The Auditor General has already made certain observations, so I won't repeat that. We're observing the amount that is owed by municipalities to ESCOM, but we're also observing the reality that, in fact, a number of municipalities have had Section 139 interventions in one form or the other instituted at an average of about 7 per annum. And this is increasing. In fact, the number of municipalities that are beginning to experience Section 139 interventions is increasing. Therefore, it's indicative of a system that, in fact, is beginning to confront challenges that require a far more deeper analysis of the problem and well thought out solutions to the problem. Now, what are some of the characteristics that we're dealing with? Some of these are structural and systemic, and therefore they're external factors to the local government itself. As I said earlier, we find a situation where a municipality, for example, is created because we have wall-to-wall local government in the country. At the point of establishment, it is not financially viable. No amount of Section 139 is going to solve this problem. So we need a different set of answers to those sort of problems. On the other hand, we have problems that relate to the organization itself. Those are organizational issues that have to do with governance, administration, and so on. And that requires an intervention that responds to the specifics of that municipality and understanding those specifics. I borrow from a report recently published by the Public Affairs Research Institute titled End of the Road, which essentially states that we had assumed that 73% of revenue in local government would come from self-generated revenue. Our reality, however, is that we have municipalities that are completely grant dependent, others are 10% dependent on own revenue, others are 50% dependent on own revenue, and it is largely the bigger cities and the metropolitan municipalities that in fact have a higher than 50% revenue base of their own. So what we have designed is not the same as what we have, but we continue to judge ourselves against design, not against what we have. So we need to confront that and ask ourselves questions about what needs to be done. If in fact we are to deal with the issues that local government confronts. We're also dealing with a situation where municipalities, at the point of demarcation, when the demarcation board sits and it matches municipalities, we certainly impose certain obligations, and Minister Dlamini Zuma reflected on this. So we've experienced this in Randwest, in Gauteng, Walter Sisulu in the Eastern Cape, and Tshwane in Gauteng, where in fact the merger of municipalities, Tshwane, it was not, if I may use the word, condemned into financial ruin, but huge pressure was placed on the municipality by the incorporation of Congress. Now, if Tshwane faced the level of pressure that they faced 2 cycles ago, what are the implications for a Rand West, where you merged Randfontein and Western area? What are the implications in Walter Sisulu? So those are problems we need to confront. So from an oversight point of view, both the executive and legislature need to look closely at the process of demarcation and determine whether in fact these are solving problems or exacerbating problems that we're confronting. So in our oversight systems, we need to ensure that we start from the beginning, is my contention. And part of that beginning continuously is about the demarcations process that's exacerbating in certain instances problems that we already have. Now, there are a number of issues that we need to think about, Honorable Chair, and some of these issues have to do with, as Parliament, what then do we need to do to ensure that we can make the necessary interventions as quickly as possible and as optimally as possible. And some of these relate to exercising oversight and continuous review, both in Parliament and in the executive, to decisions that are made. And I make here an example about the withdrawal of RSC levies and the lack of a replacement levy in district municipalities and how that has impacted on district municipalities. So we have not looked at an alternative revenue base that we have removed a revenue stream to local government. In municipalities where we haven't made decisions around, or where decisions around water service authorities have been moved from district to local municipalities, the districts suffer. And there are a whole range of those sort of decisions that require scrutiny and continuous review. So that in fact, we are able to make decisions that enable local government to become viable from the point of design. Now, Chairperson, there is a context within which we talk about what needs to be done. And 6 years ago, government adopted the Back to Basics program. And in Back to Basics, a number of problems were identified, and those are listed as a collapse of core municipal infrastructure, slow and inadequate response to service delivery, social distance between public representatives and communities, viability I've spoken about, and the ability to attract and retain appropriate skills is important, also reflected on by the minister earlier. And this is also compounded by malfeasance, corruption, and rent seeking. So from Back to Basics, what then are we saying we need to think about when we look forward? But when we think about what we need to do going forward, there is a context, and that context remains the Constitution, which clearly mandates local government to do certain things. It's supposed to provide democratic and accountable local government, supposed to ensure service provision to communities, promote social and economic development, health and safety, and encourage community involvement in the affairs of their municipality. And the white paper is a means of extending that into a policy framework for government to create a local government system. So we have the necessary policy and constitutional provisions against which we need to consider whether our local government is working or not. And I here contend that, in fact, it is a collective responsibility, not only of municipalities, but all of government, to ensure that we enable local government to do what it's supposed to do and execute its executive obligations. And through executing its executive obligations, enable the people of this country to have access to both basic municipal services and services that are enshrined in the Bill of Rights that needs to be collectively realized: access to water, access to sanitation, access to electricity, we need to ensure that we are able to do that, but that we are in the process able to review what the structural and systemic issues we are confronting. Back to Basics defined 5 pillars, and I'm not going to repeat the pillars for the lack of time, but I thought it's important to reflect on that. Almost fast forwarding to this year and last year, from the time we developed Back to Basics to where are we now? We thought it's an important thing to think about, to say when we're talking about interventions in local government, we create a framework where we institutionalize Section 154 that calls on government to provide support to local government before we even think of invoking Section 139. But for us to invoke Section 154 and institutionalize it, we developed and adopted the district development model as a framework to ensure that we're able to provide direct support to local government. So it's a system, when you're talking about the district development model, it's a system for integrated planning and budgeting, but it's also a system of direct municipal support in the district where we deploy the appropriate skills that are required, that are available to the municipalities in that space. Over the weekend, the minister launched, for example, the district hub in the Waterberg district. And as she indicated, we deployed skills such as engineers, town planning, financial skills that are available to the municipalities as a support system to local government, so that we don't say municipalities do not have adequate mechanism to ensure that they are able to develop or prepare their annual financial statements, when in fact they have a regular resource available to them that would assist them and provide necessary support. That they are unable to develop infrastructure because in fact they would have the necessary engineers that we require to support them in this regard. So about institutionalizing the support mechanisms in local government. And this slide is simply indicating how, in fact, the district development model is intended to work. But I won't go into the detail except to say it's about integrated planning and budgeting, and it's also about directly supporting local government. And we also acknowledge that, in fact, we need to ensure that Section 139 of the Constitution finds expression in legislation. So whilst we have a constitutional provision in terms of Section 139 of the Constitution that says these are the systems of intervention, we do not have legislation that interprets that Section 139. So we're currently in discussion to be able to introduce the Intergovernmental Monitoring and Support and Interventions Bill as a means, and the way in which it's written is the way, in fact, it is intended to function. The first is it imposes a responsibility on the municipality to monitor what happens, but equally on provincial and national government, continuously monitor. You can't come at the end and say, there's a problem, it is so huge, I need to intervene. So you start by monitoring, you ensure that you give adequate support, and in instances where you need intervention, you do intervention. Of course, it won't happen in such a mechanical way, it depends on the state of the municipality, but philosophically the idea is that you should start by monitoring what happens and providing adequate support. So that's really legislative intervention that we think would help us address issues of Section 139 of the Constitution, but also, in fact, Section 100, which deals with interventions in provinces. But there's a framework that needs to inform us because we have an experience of implementing Section 139. And part of that experience suggests that, in fact, our conception of 139 requires revision. So even as we get into the bill, even as we continue implementation, we need to revise the way in which we do it. Now, there's an interesting study that was commissioned by National Treasury on how Section 139 has been utilized. And I'll just make one example. So the study says, in fact, the vast majority by far of interventions in municipalities are as a result of financial issues in a municipality. In essence, it dictates that, in fact, we should have gone to Section 139.5 and read it with Section 139 of the Municipal Finance Management Act to intervene in what happens in municipalities. But we have gone back and used either Section 139, 18, B or C as the regular mechanisms of intervention. So there's also a need for us to sit back and say, provincial government, as COP at a national level, as the NCOP, a parliament broadly, is the section being imposed the correct section? And are we meeting the requisite legislative requirements that need to be met? So are we ensuring that, in fact, if it is a 1395, that there is a mechanism to ensure there's a financial recovery plan as the municipality developed it? Are we exercising oversight on the financial recovery plan itself so that, in fact, the municipality is able to get out of the situation they're in? So I'm really raising this because it should continue to frame the way in which we look at the implementation of Section 139. And the beginning should be a mechanism of continuous monitoring that enables any triggers of what needs to be done if a municipality gets into problems. And some of these triggers we see all the time in the executive and in parliament. We see, for example, the Auditor General's report. We know, for example, when they are unfunded budgets. We know, for example, when municipalities are unable to meet their obligations to pay creditors. Now, these are early warning systems that we should pick up very early and ensure that we provide support much earlier than coming late in the intervention process. We need to ensure that we encourage provincial governments to capacitate provincial partners to be able to meet their intervention obligations and support obligations. Because one of the things that we have collectively observed in the min-mac of COCTA is that, in fact, COCTA departments in provinces are not adequately resourced to be able to execute this critical function of ensuring that local government is able to meet its executive obligations. So we need to ensure that that is done, and it becomes a collective responsibility to ensure that that is done, because with stronger provincial ability to intervene, to support, we would have less municipalities falling into Section 139 requirements. And of course, as the minister indicated, our intervention as national government is at the end, Section 1397, which says if a province has failed or has demonstrated an inability or failure to intervene, then we should intervene. So we need to cross that hurdle first, but the ideal is not to get ourselves to that point. Let's ensure that provincial governments have the requisite capacity to undertake that responsibility. Just the last few points is about areas that we need to focus on. The first is we need to take advantage of the announcement by National Treasury on the principles of zero-based budgeting, because they will enable us to go back to basics and say, actually, revenue and expenditure, do they match? Are these responsive to our priorities? Are we placing the resources in the right places? So zero-based budgeting is a critical opportunity that we need to take advantage of. We need to look at municipal viability of municipalities at the point of establishment and continuously, so that in fact we do not use the same tool to address a variety of problems, and in fact you need different tools depending on the nature of the problem. If a municipality is unviable at the point of establishment, we need to be able to say, what is it that we do as government to support the financial viability of those municipalities? So that we don't come with a 139 that says, well, you have a financial crisis, we're intervening, you are a municipality in distress, when we knew upfront that you are going to be in distress. We need to demonstrate through our own APPs and strategic plans whether the outcomes of these strategic plans from our own department as COPTA enables us to address the challenges that confront local government. And indeed, Parliament has a duty to ensure its oversight that we ourselves do not prepare strategic plans that in fact are not responsive to the most basic issues that require attention. So I think these are important checklists that we need to work on collectively. And of course, we need to institutionalize the district development model, because as I said earlier, for us, this in fact is a critical intervention in that it immediately provides support from a planning, budgeting, and institutional support point of view to local government. There are a number of programs that we need to accelerate. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, except that we need to consolidate our partnerships, accelerate the integrated urban development framework, the processes of rethinking municipal finance to ensure financial viability across the board, and the way in which we're implementing the community works program. In concluding, Honorable Chairperson, our frameworks and tools need to be creative in their response to the local government challenges, and they need to be robust to the extent that they strengthen our legislative tools as a matter of urgency. We need to ensure that we address the missing gap that we have observed in relation to the structural, systemic, and reform issues that are required in local government. Equally so, we believe that when local government is given sufficient support and mismanagement arises through organizational factors, then we have the necessary constitutional tools to master swift action. So we need to ensure that we can sufficiently implement those tools and that we have capacitated the institutions that require that capacity, starting of course with the district development model, but also focusing on provincial COCTA departments and all of government to be able to respond adequately to whatever challenges we confront in local government. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister Tau, for your detailed, informative input. I will just take it right from the end, as we have indicated that the issue of the district model is something that is going to be with us for some time in your concluding remarks, so it will be good for us to understand it. So the next speaker will be the Select Committee on Cooperative Governance and Regional Affairs, Water and Sanitation and Human Settlement, Honorable Totovu. He will be dealing with the role of the National Council of Provinces in overseeing a district framework to enhance the functioning and financial sustainability of municipalities. We know that many times Honorable Totovu is the one with his team that will come with Section 139 that you have touched, Honorable Tau. But today the focus is on our role as NCOP in making sure that we oversee the district framework to enhance the functioning and financial sustainability of our municipalities. All of us here, whether we are national, provincial, we are coming from a municipality, as President Councillor Nkadimeng has quite correctly put it. Ntate Toto.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson Jomonyambi, for the opportunity. Let me also join the rest of the presenters to acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Minister of COCTA, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, acknowledge the Deputy Minister of Finance, members of Parliament present here, especially the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, Mama Mutambi, MECs present, members of the Provincial Legislature, the President of SALGA and her team, as well as all councillors who are part of this momentous occasion. Also acknowledge the presence of the Auditor General, who presented a wonderful way forward in terms of improving the financial state of our municipalities, and all members who are present here. The topic that I'm presenting, as you correctly pointed out, Honorable Chair, is the role of the NCOP in overseeing the district development model, our role in enhancing the functioning and the financial sustainability of our municipalities. The structure of my presentation will be to capture the preface on the role of the NCOP in overseeing the district development model. I will also set the scene in terms of reminding the participants of the objectives of local government, but I will also deal, I think it's quite important to do so, to outline the lessons that we learned in the last 25 years of our system of developmental local government, I will, like all other speakers, and in a summarized way, just touch on what we see as the problems that are afflicting our municipalities. And based on that understanding, I will argue to say, given the challenges of our time, the district development model is a good, solid intervention to help us to ameliorate the situation that we are confronting. But I'll also specifically, as it is the title of this particular presentation, deal with what I think is the role of the NCOP in ensuring that we enhance the district development plan to achieve our own objectives. And in the final analysis, I will deal with the conclusion, have some proposals as well as the way forward as to what is to be done in the current circumstances. Having said that, I'm going to preface my contribution by restating what the former president of our republic, President Thabo Mbeki, said in 2004 about local government. He said, our actions as local government should be to make an invaluable contribution to the important task of creating a humane society where we work selflessly for the betterment of local communities, where we fully understand that our responsibilities are to the people, and we are to do our best that in every step of the way we must be accountable, we must be sensitive, and we must be responsible to the needs of the people. I think with that, President Mbeki was capturing what is it that we need to do as a country to fulfill the developmental objectives of local government. And those that we understand to be the objectives of local government encapsulated in section 152 of the Constitution is to provide services to our people in a very sustainable way, is to ensure good governance and accountable government, is to promote social and social and economic development within our communities, is to encourage community participation, and lastly, to ensure safe and healthy environment where our people live. I think it is quite important to do that because our people deserve municipalities that all the residents of those municipalities can be proud of. And as a sphere of government closest to the people, our role in securing a peaceful, democratic, and equitable civic society is of paramount importance. And I think what President Mbeki was saying was that we need, as a country, to confront those challenges facing us, and local government can play an indispensable role in realizing that objective. Having said that, Honorable Chair, I think it is important to also remind the delegates as to what is it that we're talking about when we're talking about a municipality. And in this particular instance, I liken a municipality like a motor vehicle, whereby the people themselves, because are the ones who are electing the politicians, our councillors, are the owners of the car. And the mayor here representing all other councillors or the rest of the councillors is the driver of the car that belongs to the owner. The essence of what I'm saying is that we must, in what we do, ensure that we are with the people and be guided by what the people are saying. In that sense, become people-driven and people-centered approach in our own development, and that a manager representing the administrative component of the municipality must look at the engine, ensure that the engine is well serviced, is well machined, and at the end of the day, it does create what we want to say are the achievement of the developmental objectives of local government. This presentation picked up a slide that I responsibilities as the executive mayor of a city, that in whatever that we do to ensure that we deal with the issue of the toxic political administrative interface, we must make sure that at all the times, the political component of council work very closely with the administrative component, and both understand and complement one another in the realization of the developmental objectives of our own society using local government. Having said that, Honorable Chair, it's quite important to then place what I consider my observations in relation to the lessons that we have learned in the last 25 years since the advent of our new democratic dispensation. In the last, and in this case, I'm picking up 3 lessons that I think are quite relevant, and they will help members of parliament as they play their oversight, the legislative and public participation role, ensure that we understand what are the lessons and what are the experiences and what is it that we have seen in the last 25 years. And I argue that local government has been one of the most complex projects of state transformation since 1994. The problems, as all the speakers have said, you see them at local government. Local government is a cold face. It is where things are happening. It is where delivery is expected to happen. And in that sense, it has been very, very difficult, very, very complex. And that in itself, it has created it has de-linked the agenda of transforming our country to be a united country, a democratic country, a country that will serve its own people. And therefore, this project has become very, very complex to undertake. And it is an acknowledgement of many of the speakers who came before me. But the second task or the second lesson that I pick up is the fact that the task of local government transformation have proven to be more complex and protracted than was initially anticipated. I think those who were involved in the crafting of the new dispensation of local government, including the white paper and all the legislative framework, would understand that whatever that we said, the practicality thereof has been very, very, very much quite problematic and protracted, as I'm saying. And in that sense, a mismatch and a dichotomy, what I call a dichotomy between implementation, monitoring, as well as policy development in that sense. But the third observation that I'm making in this case is to say that all the interventions and programs undertaken by government since 1994, whether it is project viability that was looking at the health of municipalities, whether it was project consolidate that was ensuring a hands-on support to municipalities, whether it was the local government turnaround strategy, operation cleanup that was anticipating that by 2014 we would have had clean audits in all of our municipalities, whether it was Sienza, whether it was back to basics. All of these programs and interventions have sharpened our understanding and our theoretical perspective on understanding the problems and the challenges in the local sphere of government. And this has led us to a conclusion that we need a paradigm shift. We need to mainstream our hands-on support to local government, but we also need to coordinate our work in a way that will ensure that we realize the objectives of local government. And in this case, the district development model, the subject matter of the day, is we think that it's an answer to ameliorate the situation and to make improvements in terms of taking us forward. Having said that, Honorable Chair, it is quite important to just, as I indicated, to just give a summary like all the speakers have done so that I'm able to focus my presentation in this particular instance. But it is to give a summary version of the problems that are facing municipalities. Simply put, where are we at the moment? I think all the institutions, including the Office of the Auditor General, the National Treasury, independent institution, and our own practical observations, we agree that the municipal finances of many municipalities are collapsing, and therefore we need an intervention in that sense. That in this regard, 70%, 76% of our municipalities need serious attention, whereas about a third of our municipalities are vulnerable, which means can collapse at any time. And one of the other practical experiences linked to this collapse of the municipal finance is the fact that the audit opinions of most of the municipalities have regressed, and that the cash balance, that is the money that the municipalities have in the bank, is in many instances at a negative point. But lastly, in relation to that, the cash coverage, meaning the amount that can sustain the municipality, which a normal norm is saying it is 3 months. Many municipalities are at 0, are at 1%, are at a day. And in this particular case, it creates a very serious problem for municipalities. But again, as we all know, the UIF&W, our unauthorized expenditure, our irregular expenditure, our fruitless expenditure, and wasteful expenditure, they've all increased over the last few years, and every year they go up astronomically. And this is what all of us are agreed. And therefore, we need some interventions that are practical. And we as Parliament play a leading role in terms of discharging our own responsibilities of oversight. But another problem that I need to also flag very quickly, and a lot of speakers have said it, that is the inability of municipalities to collect the necessary revenue, this revenue to enhance them to implement their own programs, to render services to our own communities. And as it is, most of them, and as speakers said, they have almost 30% of the municipalities have adopted what is called an unfunded budget, which is unlawful. It's not acceptable that municipalities can do that. But also important is to say that 34% of the municipalities have what is called the budget deficit, which simply put, it means that the expenditure of municipalities exceed their income, and that is a problem. And that, as I indicated, accounts to the fact that they do not collect the debt, they do not have the good debt collection strategies, as well as revenue enhancement strategies that must help the municipalities. But also a big problem about municipalities in that they lack the ability to, some of them, they lack the ability to pay their creditors on time. And that has a profound negative implication for the companies, especially the BEE and smaller companies, because if the municipality can't pay you and you have rendered a service, it becomes a problem. And this signifies the kind of situation that our municipalities are facing. We all know that part of the problems of ESCOM is as a result of many municipalities are owing ESCOM billions of rents. So is the problem with the water boards that are owned by the municipalities. And the municipalities get these services, electricity and water, from these institutions, but they do not pay for that. And another problem linked to that, or that has exacerbated the situation, is the VBS mutual bank deposits, where about 14 or so municipalities across the country decided to break the law, decided to violate the MFMA by depositing in the mutual banks when the law doesn't allow them to do that. I will not talk a lot about Section 139 as a problem, but we all know that poor service delivery and protests in our communities has resulted and warranted at the end of the day the intervention by different provincial government in this instance. One of the problems that has come forward is the fact that there is poor accountability and no consequence management, especially by the hierarchies within our municipalities. And flanking another problem that compounds the whole problem is the toxic political administrative relations that are existing. Deployment versus appointment. What is good, or they can be used in a complementary way or what. And I think this is a matter that, as part of our endeavor to professionalize local government, we must look at this particular matter and do it in a way that will sustain and retain the skills within our municipalities. And the last 2 points relating to infrastructure development, that projects are delaying, some of them are not completed, and the MIG budgets are not spent for as conditional grants are not spent for the purpose in which they were allocated for, and that municipalities do not even spend their MIG grants, infrastructure grants, and that creates rollovers as such, and that there is a problem of poor infrastructure maintenance, that municipalities are neglecting this. You see this visible by the potholes that you see in municipalities, sewer spillages, water losses, as well as electricity losses that is occurring in our municipalities. Having said that, what is quite clear, it is the fact that the municipality, as it is even reflected in our media and elsewhere, and even our practical experiences, that the municipalities are in crisis and they need to be extricated from that morass of and shame in terms of ensuring that they contribute in us realizing our own objectives. Having said that, Honorable Chairperson, I argue that we are in these present challenges that I painted in terms of the summary that I gave of the problems afflicting local government. And I argue that going forward in the future, there is a gap analysis, or I do a gap analysis to say there is that mismatch and you cannot achieve the developmental objectives of the society. You cannot achieve the objectives as set out in section 152 of the Constitution if you do not intervene quite decisively, and your municipalities cannot be capable and financially sustainable if you are not going to intervene. And as I argued, given the experiences that we had, it is quite important that therefore we use the district development model as an intervention to help us to deal with those particular issues. And for me, I argue that we need a paradigm shift in terms of attending to the issues that are facing us. Next slide. And then for me, as the Honorable Minister has indicated, the district development model is a game changer. It is an intervention that is necessary to address many of the challenges that are facing municipalities. And the essence of it is that we need to improve coordination. We need to work together. We need to lend, as government as a whole, all the spheres of government, all the entities of government, all the state-owned enterprises, all of us, we need to land in one spot, understand one another, have joint planning, have joint implementation, and therefore achieve the objectives of local government. As we are all aware, some of the information I will not deal with because it is well known that it is piloted in the three districts. as such, and this needs to be done, and that the purpose thereof is to fast-track service delivery, is to achieve integrated planning, is to accelerate integration and align the work of government, and at the end of the day, ensure that the resources that are mega, that are few, that we all need to have are mobilized and consolidated and channeled towards a common direction. In my view, I said that the district development model, in order to achieve its own objectives, you need to develop what I call a scenario analysis that will ensure that you achieve your own objectives. At the moment, if we go with the tempo, the pace, the time, and the resources that are allocated to us, it is clear that we are going to fall into a drain. But we need that paradigm shift. We need that giant leap forward to ensure that we plug all the loopholes, we solve all the problems, we implement this to ensure that at the end of the day, we succeed. The next slide, I'm using a model to simplify the application of the district model. And I'm arguing that the current situation require all of us to move from one point, the next slide, to move from one point that will take us to the desired future. And that future, I say that we must all of us get into a bus and take a journey that will ensure that at the end of the day, we achieve the predetermined objectives of our society, that we achieve the vision that is encapsulated in our policy documents, that we achieve what our forebears said to us, that we need to create a non-sexist society, we need to create a united society, we need to create a prosperous society where all South Africans are going to benefit. And it is quite important that we use the district development model to undertake that particular journey to that particular destination. And with this, I'm trying to summarize what we need to do moving forward. But having said that, we need to prepare the slide before this one, if you can just go back a bit, the slide before that. I'm saying that we need to prepare for the journey. Preparing for the journey, it means that every district must have a process plan outlined exactly in relation to what Dr. Zuma has shared with us, that you need to identify the needs of the district, because our districts have peculiarities, are not the same. If we go to Waterberg is a mining district. There is a lot of mining activities that is taking place. And this process plan must be the one that scans the environment and say to us in precision, this is what we are going to do to ensure that we undertake this. And this must operate within the framework that we have alluded to. But this journey that we must undertake needs what the minister also said, that it is the champions. And champions in this case, are our ministers and deputy ministers, our MECs, and we argue that at least in one province, one MEC must be designated to a particular district to work with the minister in that spirit of cooperative governance. And the district mayor or the metro mayor must ensure that they become our tall leaders in terms of undertaking the journey that I've spoken about. And the senior management of the departments across the board in all the spheres, local government, provincial government, and national government must form part of that team to drive all the stakeholders to achieve those particular objectives. But having said that, I also summarize who are the passengers, who are the people who must get into this bus, the district development model bus to take us to that destination, the future destination that we all desire. We need local municipalities in the district. We need all the government departments that are operating within the district, especially national departments and provincial departments, our state-owned enterprises, the parastatical institution. We need the ward committees. We need the other stakeholders to come on board. We need experts and professionals who are going to help to guide the district in terms of the peculiarities that I've spoken about. And these are the people who must lend in one place to ensure that we develop our issues in that sense. But having said that, again, you then need an itinerary. You cannot undertake a trip without knowing where you're going to, what is it that we are going to do. And I argue that in every district, the district must develop its plans, must identify the key performance areas. What is it that the district is going to do that is special, that is unique, that is peculiar than the other districts? And what are the strategies and the developmental objectives to be developed? What are the key performance indicators that are going to guide? Because we need to achieve certain milestones, we need to achieve certain goals at a particular time, and it's quite important that we develop the key performance areas that must help us to achieve the objectives. Every district, in our view, must set up its own performance targets. There are going to be projects and programs as well as plans to be implemented, and those must be encapsulated in that district plan as part of the district development model. And obviously, business plans that are bankable, that are clear, that are very straightforward, that are going to help that district to address issues of housing, human settlement in that sense, is water, is sewer, it is roads or whatever processes, or even the issues of local economic development. And I like what one of the speakers said today, to say that we need to have the industrial development fund. This fund must go straight to municipalities so that it must help municipalities to create jobs, to address issues of poverty, to grow the economy, and to address the issues of unemployment as such. And in that sense, we're moving forward to ensure that we achieve those. But this model, as it is set up in the district, we argue that it needs fuel. And in this case, all the budgets, all the resources of the different departments, whether it is in the province, national, it is state-owned entities, must all be in one pot geared towards that district. And I argue that this bus will need fuel in order to achieve those particular objectives. Finance, equipment, material, performance management system in place, but equally important to ensure that we communicate with our communities, we communicate with our stakeholders to realize those particular objectives. This journey will require to be serviced at all the time. This engine, as it runs, it requires systems, it requires processes, it requires structures to be established in order to ensure that where decisions have got to be made, decisions have got to be made accordingly. Where things have got to be done, they've got to be done properly. And this district development plan doesn't replace anything, but it is a complementary exercise for all the processes that we have. And it must complement the policies and procedures of municipalities. It must work within the bylaws of the municipalities, and as well as the delegated powers allocated to different authorities within our municipalities. And lastly, in relation to this journey that we must undertake, this bus going forward, it must be maintained. It needs to be serviced at all the times. It needs to be rekindled so that it moves properly to the desired destination. And in this instance, we argue that at all times, the model in the district must put up the monitoring system, the evaluating system, and there must be a way in which we report so that when there are gaps, when there are problems, when there are deficiencies, we are able to address that, because we keep all the time to monitor what every district is doing. We evaluate their performance and accordingly report. And in this sense, I argue that we are going to make an indelible contribution in terms of addressing the issues of the time. But having said that, I want to characterize the role of the NCOP. As we all know that the NCOP represent the interests of different provinces in the national sphere. But in this particular instance, the NCOP must continue to play an oversight role. It must continue to make laws. It must continue to encourage public participation in this sense. And my argument is that in every district, we will say that the ingredients that are necessary to ensure a functional, a stable, a capable, a financially sustainable municipality. It is when it has all the 6 components that I'm arguing about. Firstly, we need to ensure that every municipality deals with the issues of strategic human resource, where every municipality, without fail, ensure that it recruits, it retains, and it develops the best possible talents and skills within its institution to achieve those particular objectives. But the second one is to ensure performance management. And in this case, every municipality must create an environment of responsiveness, of high performance, and clear accountability in order to achieve those particular objectives that we're talking about. But we must develop a culture that was developed or orchestrated since 1994, a culture of Batopili, where those principles of Batopili, we need to ensure that they are entrenched, they are available, and they are applied accordingly to ensure that we accelerate service delivery that is qualitative in nature. And in this instance, it's quite important to establish people-centered culture of service delivery within our municipalities, as well as customer care underpinned, as I indicated.
As you move to your last slide.
Yes, last 2 slides. And in this case, also to deal with the issues of planning and governance, ensuring that we're putting up systems in place to address issues of financial management and sustainability. And lastly, in terms of the slide, to maximize communication and stakeholder relation. With that, Honorable Chair, it will be the role of NCOP to ensure that we realize capable and financially sustainable municipalities. And this is a role that I argue that all the MPs must play in their district, conduct oversight visits, monitor and oversee executive actions, ensure that the budgets are spent appropriately, that there is observance of the protocols and the necessary laws, and that there is, at the end of the day, public participation. My conclusion, Honorable Chair Nyambi, is to say the district model is a viability. It can be achieved. And the central message that must be sent out there is that as government, the entire system of government, we want to accelerate service delivery. We want to align and integrate our planning in order to achieve the objectives of local government. With that, I think we need to play that role as Parliament. And if we do that, all of us, I think will make an immense and immeasurable contribution in improving the lives of our people and achieving the objectives of developmental local government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Totovu. Without much ado, out of the 3 presentations, right from Auditor General, Deputy Minister Tau, and Honorable Totovu, I'll now invite comments and some hands, comment or clarity seeking question or some engagement. Honorable Councillor Ngubane, the first one, then Chief Whip Mohai is the second one, then Councillor Ngwenya, the third one, then Honorable Boshoff, and then Honorable Sileko, in that order. Councillor Ngubane.
No, thanks very much, Chair. Greetings to everybody. I think one of the presentation highlighted the failures of Section 139. And I want to actually probably make a brief diagnosis and also the way forward. I think we need a paradigm shift on the implementation of Section 154. As things stand, we've been using Section 154 more of a firefighting approach, firefighters approach. We go to the municipalities when there is a crisis. So I think we need a paradigm shift there. I believe that particularly Culture and Treasury, through Section 154, they must be part of planning. One way you need to find a mechanism of incorporating themselves without taking over, assist, give the necessary support for municipalities to ensure that their plans are adequate and accurate. We should not be having a conversation about municipalities that passes unfunded budget. They should be there giving the necessary support. And such will also have a bearing later on. So they should be part of planning. They should also be part of monitoring. So that what my former President Tau said in the turnaround strategy he presented, number one talks about early warnings. So that through Section 154, you can detect dangers early while they're still small and find a way of transforming them before they become bigger. And in the event that municipalities fail to implement what has been a turnaround strategy, such will empower the Section 139 so that because they've been part of the process, they not only arrive in the scene at the level of crisis, they've been there. They will be in a good position to make a correct diagnosis. For instance, the municipality might fail to actually collect. And such will be a result of different factors depending on the specific municipality. Because the report says, normally you find that Section 139 will be deployed. Once it is withdrawn, the municipality will go back to where it is. It means the diagnosis its intervention was only localized, not systemic. It's not addressing the challenges in the system. It only goes on the manifestation or the practical expression of the challenge and leave the causal factors unattended. As a result, when you withdraw the 139 intervention, the municipality goes back where it was before. That's why in many municipalities, almost the whole term are being intervened. So to cure that, it's important that the Treasury and COPTA, they become a part of planning and monitoring so that they can intervene from that. Because it's very clear that it means for those municipalities that falls back after the intervention, it's because there's an issue of capacity. So the intervention, while a deployed team will go and execute that particular authority where there's a challenge, but in that process, if a diagnosis also incorporated the causal factor that is the issue of capacity, that intervention must also incorporate the skills transfer, must have the skills transfer component so that when it's removed, municipality can stand actually on their own.
As you presented the last one.
The last one is that I've got a strong view that we are using administration and government instruments to solve a political challenge. I'm saying, in terms of the Systems Act, if you talk about municipality, it talks about a triangle, 3 elements. It says is the political office 1, 2 is administration office 2, 3 is the community. But the practical experience tells us that there is a bigger role when neglecting the relationship between the political organization as an organization and also the state. For instance, we are talking, part of the theme talks about capacity in terms of human resource, whether politically or administratively, human resource capacity. Now, 2/3 of the councillors in 2016 are new. And what are the implications if this thing continues? Is that it keeps the sector in the learning, permanently in the learning curve. By the time people begin to grasp legislation in an integrated and coordinated fashion, the term comes to an end. 2, there are lessons and knowledge that is drawn from practical experience. Immediately you remove all those people, it means you've lost that knowledge, that capacity that you've actually built and drawn from the practical experience, not learned from the books, but as knowledge that you draw from practical experiences. It's all negated, which will then mean local government will always remain a training ground. You train and you don't maintain. It's one of the challenges, and you can't address it through administrative instrument. You need to actually address it through a political approach. So political parties have a bigger role to play, because most of the challenges that are in the government are migrating also from political organization and manifesting themselves in the municipalities. Never mind the intervention that you make, it will never produce lasting results. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ngubane. Chief Whip Mohai.
Thank you, House Chair. I just want to learn more on what the Auditor General raised on when he was dealing with the subject of key interventions to improve local government audit outcomes. He raised something very important in my view, that there should be discipline, project planning as a preventative measure. Much as this is important, adequate planning is important, but it is surprising how it is most neglected. I was first one to make that statement. So what would be the thinking of the Auditor General? Do we think that there is a relationship between adequate skill-based knowledge and experience in these municipalities that do well or otherwise? It's interesting just to fuse these things to know that maybe there are those that are performing well. What would be the attributes of those that are doing well? Because we operate in a rapidly changing environment. More often, what are the kind of these issues that disrupt planning in municipalities? Okay, put it very simple. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief Whip. Councillor Ngwenya.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And Chairperson, let me join other speakers in welcoming the presentations. And I cannot agree more with the Honorable China Dodovu in terms of industrial development. That's a route that we must take. And the National Parliament through Treasury must make funding available so that we are able to build viable communities. The second comment goes to the Auditor General. In terms of the AG, what I just want to know as a starting point is that to what extent is the use of junior staff or students during the auditing of the municipalities or any other institution? Because from where I'm sitting, that has got a negative impact if we are using junior staff to conduct audit in various municipalities. That's the method that I think we must look into so that going forward we develop a strategy of making sure that we use qualified people or qualified personnel so that we get the desired outcome. The second matter, Chair, is that there is a need that as municipalities we need to develop 6 monthly or quarterly AFS so that we are able to track as to whether or not are we on course as municipalities. That will go a long way in terms of correcting or putting the internal controls and correcting all the wrongs that shall have happened while we're implementing our budget. The third point, Chair, there is a need that we must strengthen communication between the Auditor General's office, particularly during the auditing period. We must strengthen the communication between the offices of the executive mayors and the AG in this way. Often than not, the AG will request the information from the administration. And in terms of the time frame, administration must respond within 2 days. Failure to respond within 2 days, the AG will make an opinion. Or failure to respond within 5 days, the AG will make an opinion. But during that particular period, the AG is not notifying the office of the political heads to say, kindly note that I have made such request or the information from your administration, and I'm expecting the responses. That is why you'll find that in most of the instances, our administration will fail to submit the information on time, and therefore the AG will make an opinion just because of the failure to submit the information. Therefore, we're making a request that we must be involved, we should be involved before damage is taking place or is happening. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ngwenya. Honorable Boshoff.
Thank you very much, House Chair, and good afternoon to you. The questions that I'm posing are to the Minister and the DM. According to the Auditor General's report for the 2018-19 financial year, 1.26 billion rand was spent by municipalities on consultants. Minister and Deputy Minister, this is just not on. If we have people employed in those positions, why do we still need consultants to do the job? Somewhere something is very wrong. We are wasting taxpayers' money, and if you have a look, of the 257 municipalities, only 14% of them were able to show any improvement. The other thing that is worrying is, according to the AG's report, 79% of municipalities have dire health status problems, and this is of huge concern. And I'd like to know from the Minister and the Deputy Minister, what interventions are they going to put in place, apart from the big talk about the district models that I have my concerns about? The other problem, or the other concern that I also have, is that the supply chain management, since the 2016-17 financial year, it has regressed. Only 2% of the municipalities are fully complying, and we all know that these are those that are governed by the DA. Minister and Deputy Minister, proper administration and accountability over the financial affairs of local government is sorely needed to eradicate the complete collapse of our local municipalities. And I ask that this be done sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Boshoff. Honorable Sileku.
Good afternoon, colleagues, friends. Am I audible?
Yes, we are more than audible, sir.
Thank you very much. Sir, let me first welcome the presentation from DM Tau as a former president of SALGA and as a former mayor within a municipality. And I would like good DM to give me an honest answer, to when I'm asking him that, the power plays in these provinces politically, can it be regarded as one of the contributors when it comes to the implementation of Section 139 interventions? Does he really think that it is one of the factors that actually contributes to this Section 139 intervention that does not actually give us the required outcomes? And also, my second question is that what is the national government going to do going forward? Because what tend to happen in this Section 139, we tend to neglect Section 154. And Section 154 says the provincial government must make sure that they support municipalities, but they neglect their responsibility and nothing happens to them. Instead, they want to deal with these municipalities by putting them on Section 139. And that is a problem. Does the DM tell me now, going forward, how are they going to make sure when a provincial government does not fulfill its constitutional responsibility in terms of Section 154, how are they going to deal with it? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Seleku. Honorable Dutoit.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Chair, the speakers were correct when they said that local government system needs to be revised. But it's a proven fact that smaller municipalities can be governed better. Amalgamated municipalities are experiencing tremendous challenges with regards to service delivery and lack of management. And that's in effect, that results in a lack of service delivery. Now, the ANC government's greatest failure up to now was the terrible condition of our municipalities. The problem is not that there's too much authority that resides on local government, but too little. At the moment, municipalities need to wait for provincial to assist and for provincial to decide what's going to happen instead of making their own decisions and being responsible for what is happening in those municipalities. Municipal regions have become too large and there's no real governance on ground level. And on top, that municipalities were used to deploy cadres. I'm referring off the top of my head, the JB Marks municipality in the Northwest Province, which was initially a good municipality, Potchefstroom, and then when it amalgamated with Ventersdorp, we're currently sitting with huge problems on this side as a result of that. I'm not particularly supporting the district model. When I look at the district municipalities that we have, like the Dr. Kenneth Kahunda district municipality, where a very small percentage of the actual budget is actually spent to assist other municipalities. Most of the funds are being used to pay wages and contracts and events that are being planned. And then when it comes to Section 139, it was interesting that in the AG report mentioned that the barrier between political and the administrative departments in municipalities has collapsed. And that was a concern. And that resulted in the collapse of these municipalities. But Kochta indicated that the working relationship between administration and politicians must be strengthened. I think the whole idea is that we must leave the administration to do their work, and the political side must just indicate a direction in which that specific municipality is supposed to go. It's as a result of too much political interference in municipalities that we are where we are at this stage, with so many municipalities being unable to look after themselves. It was also highlighted, and the main reason for Section 139 interventions is as a result of the financial issues, mostly irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure, tender irregularities, and blatant financial mismanagement. I'm going to refer again to JB Marks Municipality as an example. I think on the 5th of August, it was indicated that that municipality was placed under administration, and up to now, the vetted administrator that's supposed to see to it that things are being set right in that municipality hasn't called a municipal council's meeting to introduce himself to council. So the conclusion is that Section 139 interventions, as alluded to by numerous speakers today, is not efficient. It is just a mere last sign of hope, and then that flame is blown out in the first month because there is no progress report. And at the end of the day, these administrators are not being held accountable for the work that they are supposed to do in those municipalities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dutoit. Honorable Moima.
Thank you, House Chair. Let me also take this opportunity to express my appreciations to the work done by the three presenters. From my side, House Chair, just three areas that I thought I must raise with our respective presenters. The first one relates to the AG. On just a reflection in terms of the progress that we have made with regard to the strengthening of the work of the AG. You remember that 2 years back there was an amendment to the Act which empowered and strengthened the hand of the AG, particularly with regard to failure on the part of the head of the administrations and also the leadership to deal with the AG's queries from the previous audit work. Just want to check from the AG's side in terms of whether are there any lessons that he could share with us in terms of the efficiency and the effectiveness of those amendments. The second one relates to the DM. DM has correctly captured how the system of local government has evolved, and a key to the evolution has been various work that we have done from Project Consolidate, the 5-year strategic agenda, the back to basics, and the common denominators across those three work that we have done, or those three agendas, has been the strengthening of the municipal finances, the broadening of the provision of basic services, good governance, and also to ensure that there is municipal financial viability. I just want to check in terms of celebrating the 20 years of developmental local government. Are there any lessons that we could do, that we could derive from those various phases, from Project Consolidate to back to basic? But more than that, there are municipalities that were identified, I think, in the first administration, those that were identified to be unviable. How far are we in terms of ensuring those municipalities that are not viable are merged with those viable municipalities? The third one relates to the presentation made by the chair of the select committee. The chair will recall that in the second and the third administration, there was a program of district coordination under the umbrella of Integrated Sustainable Rural Development Strategy and also the Urban Renewal Strategy. And at the center of that was coordination across districts, but more than that, even the vehicles that were used, that we are currently using of the district developmental model in the form of political champions, technical champions, deployment of various ministers. What are the lessons that we could derive from the Integrated Sustainable Rural Development Program and Urban Renewal that can ensure that the DDM will not suffer the same fate that the Integrated Sustainable Rural Development Program and the Urban Renewable Program has? Because I think what is critical is to ensure that there is a continuity of the work that we are doing as government, with a view to ensure that we avoid a situation where we come up with various programs. We come up with various programs, then leave them halfway, and then come with new concepts. Thank you, Honorable House Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Miamang. The last one before we get the responses, it's Honorable Fesser.
Thank you, Honorable House. If municipalities failed to implement all the COGTA and National Treasury plans for the past 20 years and explicitly ignored MFMA legislated regulations, ignored the, and failed to submit all their reports and statements that is expected of them at provincial governments, how will COGTA succeed to implement and ensure that the district model will succeed, since the district municipalities are as troubled and as corrupt as their locals under its jurisdiction? How will COGTA ensure then that the disciplines and preventative controls, the absolute failure of checks and balances, be implemented as the audit outcomes regressed to a national state of disaster in most of South African municipalities? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Fesser. The first person to respond to the questions will be Auditor General, Mr. Makwetu. Mr. Makwetu.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nyambi. I've got about three, I think. The first came from Honorable Mohai.
I don't think they should have used nails.
They do.
The nails just slid out of the wall.
Honorable members, sorry, Honorable Makwet, honorable members, if you are not recognized, mute your mic. Now, the person on the floor, it's Auditor General Makwetu, and we're listening to the response. Please, Honorable Makwetu, you are protected.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start with a question that Honorable Mohai raised regarding the proposition I put across for the need for planning. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the opposite, and the opposite being the absence of planning. Because when there's no planning for the implementation of programs and projects, the different skills, the different expertise, the different capacities that are needed will seldom be assembled. Because if we didn't plan, then we are none the wiser as to what we need to be able to achieve the things that funding has been made available for. And I think it is one of those key things with information, and I guess with planning, we end up generating a lot of information. And information, Chair, once it is produced and is given to us and to anybody, suddenly it has got predictive value. Because when we plan to achieve something that we can predict, which means that all the other things that might come in the way of achieving our objective, we should be able to manage upfront, rather than put ourselves in a position where we are not even able to disrupt the ones that might want to take our resources for us. So I think there is an argument to be made about planning. That planning should not be something that has to do with compliance, just because a particular document says there must be a plan. A plan must be looked at as a predictive control. It's got predictive value, and it's got the ability to disrupt the people that spend their time studying our documents online. And once they've figured out what we want to do, then the next thing we end up with an unsolicited proposal on our desks, someone trying to supply us something. It often happens in institutions that have not got plans, because sometimes they will be hit in the first week of February, when those that spend time analyzing our documents have already figured out what they want to sell to us. So they can sell us all sorts of things and we might accept them because we think that we will have an under expenditure that might find its way back into national treasury. Before you know it, suddenly you've got irregular expenditure because you went out and sought the services of a service provider you may not have needed, partly because you didn't plan to execute a particular project. So that's where I'm coming from in respect to this issue of implementation plan, because it's not just us in the system of local government. There are other interested parties who know when an equitable share has been delivered to an institution and it has hit the bank account, all of a sudden they are all hovering around trying to activate their proposals because now they know there is money, but they know this institution has not put any plan to do anything with the money, even though it was money being forwarded on the back of a budget that would have been submitted last year or 18 months ago. And so I think for me, that is pretty much one of the things, because then you know that if you've got a proper plan, we know who we need to come and do this thing for us. We can almost go out to the market and test the different service providers. We would almost know what the price is, and we are able to monitor through council the delivery of that project with milestones, so that we don't discover after 6 months that that road was only just about 3 kilometers and the money is gone, when in fact we thought we were going to fix a 20-kilometer road. And I think those are some of the key things that I was referring to when I said that transparent plan that is able to narrow the space for abuse of public resources is pretty much something that is quite important to have as part of the tools of managing any municipality or any institution for that matter. Coming to Councillor Ngwenya. Councillor Ngwenya, this issue of junior staff in auditing is an old reality. If you look at audit institutions way back to the time when economies were predominantly linked or limited to railways and agriculture. That is now pre-industrial times. Auditors used to be drawn from the ranks of people who had absolutely no experience of having done a similar job anywhere. And I think right down to the industrial stage of our development, you still find that it is there in the private sector, it is there in the public sector. And I think thankfully, because of that model, it has been able to also produce quite a number of people, if you look at our own economy, that run big corporations, and many of them started green behind their ears. The only thing that they were able to produce was the fact that they've done studies in commerce, they've qualified as accountants, but they don't have the experience of evaluating the books of another person. So auditing is a training ground by far. You can look at any auditing firm across the world. It starts with people who absolutely have no idea. But I can tell you now, Honorable Ngwenya, the people that started in the office while I've been there, many of them can shoot the lights out when you put them down here to analyze the financial statements that we audit. It's a journey. Our institution as an audit office in the current South African environment is proud of having produced no less than 1,000 chartered accountants just as an audit office of South Africa alone. And in our books currently, we have trained and produced under our watch currently close to 700 chartered accountants. And the discipline of auditing, even though you start with junior people, it is normally structured with a lot of people like me in the background who can look beneath and beyond the surface and be able to identify these things, monitor, train, develop, and counsel people until they themselves can be able to do it without supervision. That's the nature of it. It's been like that since 1860 something, when railways and agriculture was the only economic activity anywhere in the world. So we are continuing to do this because we recruit them from universities where they are studying commerce subjects. I can promise you now now in the audit office in South Africa, our minimum entry level is somebody who has done postgraduate studies in accounting and auditing. Sometimes because they are dealing with people sometimes who are a different generation to them, they sometimes shiver in front of them. But we've got many interventions to make them understand that all they are looking for is audit evidence. They are not looking to show up anybody's weaknesses in any way. And I think that over a 2-3 year period, you suddenly get someone who can stand in front of a client alone and be able to navigate the different risks and the different challenges that we face in auditing. Coming to the other point that you raised regarding communication with yourselves as mayors, that is part of our standard approach to our audits. But what typically happens also, Councillor Ngwenya, is that many of the officials that we deal with, because they know they have not maintained proper records to be able to produce them for audit, they duck and dive for the longest period and sometimes make it sound like they were only given 2-3 days, when in fact they have been just ducking and diving for weeks on end because they don't know where to hide. Maybe the documentation that was requested of them, they could not accept or own up to the fact that they never saw it or they never kept it. So we wonder sometimes whether they're protecting something, and when we're gone, then they will say these auditors are unreasonable. They come to a conclusion even before I was able to give them the document. It is not always true. We have always tested this, and in some cases, mayors have also been encouraged to come to our final clearance meetings so that we can share with them our insights. But we will repeat this point and make sure that none of the leadership of the institutions, even if they are on the political side of the institution, because they play oversight, we can't leave them outside of conversations that will result in negative audit outcomes for them. And then the last one, Chair, was from Honorable Moimang regarding the progress of the Public Audit Act. As you will recall, the President signed the Act into law to be effective from years commencing 1 April 2019. So the year that ended now in March is year number 1 since this Act was promulgated and signed into law. We have already started the implementation process in local government. When we released our audit outcomes beginning of July, we had only just started doing a pilot, and that's why we reported on about 9 different municipalities. And now in this current financial year, we have expanded the application of this particular amendment. What will it do? This amendment is going to do something that we have never done before. What it will do is it will go into the accounting records and into the institution and identify whether there are any material irregularities. Now, material irregularities are defined in the Public Audit Act as those transgressions that are likely to lead to the financial loss in the institution, either because of fraud or some deviation from an existing law. So what we do with this, we then bring it to the attention of the accounting officer and give an accounting officer 20 days within which to respond to that material irregularity. What does that response mean? It means that the accounting officer must put in place measures that stop that financial loss from continuing. A practical example of this will be if we gave, as an institution, a municipality to go build a water treatment works, like the same example I made earlier on, and we look in the books and we find that this whole 20 million has been spent, but there's nothing to show for it. The accounting officer, through this amendment, is then given 20 days during the course of the audit to go find reasonable or sustainable explanations for why the money is no longer there, but the thing that was being bought is also not there. So it really pushes the envelope now, because it makes the accounting officer to look to Section 62 of the MFMA, which empowers the accounting officer to do everything possible to put in place a risk management framework, to put in place internal controls. In the absence of that, if the accounting officer does not fix that material irregularity, it will either be referred to law enforcement agencies for further investigation if it is an elaborate project that requires a lot of time to get to the bottom of. Failing that, we will, once that report from the referral mechanism has been received, we will then incorporate in the audit report of the institution a section that deals with a binding remedial action that would have been issued by the audit office in respect to steps that must be taken to recover that loss and to stop any loss associated with that project. If all of that fails, then the audit office is empowered to issue a certificate of debt in the name of an accounting officer who was not able to exercise their responsibilities pursuant to the recommendations that were given by the audit office. As far as local government is concerned, we are going to see something along these lines come next year. Once we have signed off around December the financial statements, it will normally take us about 12 months and a bit to navigate through these particular steps before we can ultimately attach a liability to somebody who had the requisite power and responsibility to exercise control over these finances. Because the way it works now, we report on issues of irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and then those that do not want to take accountability will often bombard us with all sorts of theoretical arguments about whether irregular expenditure is corruption or this and the other. So we don't want to get into that debate because the material irregularity speaks for itself and it will be provided with regards to whatever evidence is required that comes out of an audit. So that's where we are. We are in implementation mode. In local government currently, the audits that are underway have now been structured such that these amendments are applied. As far as the PFMA is concerned, the same thing is also on the go. So when the reports are signed and there are material irregularities in a particular municipality, they will be part of the reporting mechanism that will follow that institution into the council. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, AG Makwetu. Deputy Minister of COGTA, Honorable Tao.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Let me start with the points that were raised by Councillor Ngubane in relation to the implementation of Section 139 and how we have implemented it so far. And I think it's important to reflect on the fact that in the implementation of Section 139, we've experienced varied levels of successes and challenges. In many instances, we have found that in interventions that have been done where there has been some improvement at the end of the administration, it has happened in certain instances that the municipalities regress, meaning that in fact, the issue is about how do we sustain the successes that have been achieved in an environment where there's been a regress. And the question I think we need to engage is whether at that point we institutionalize systems of sustaining the progress made. And from the anecdotal evidence that we have, it is suggesting that in fact we tend to allow the administrators to leave, but to not monitor the sustenance of that environment. And I believe that we collectively have a duty as those who, amongst others, agreed to enable the province to institute a Section 139 to have a post-implementation monitoring of the environment. So that we don't say, but it is the province that appointed the administrator and not acknowledge that in fact, both COGTA through the minister and indeed the NCOP have agreed that such should be instituted. So we should not at the end of the administration leave it and then sit back and wait for the province to come back. I believe that we must create a post-implementation monitoring system. The instances as reflected by Councillor Ngubane, where in fact we have not seen progress at the point of instituting a Section 139 to the end. So whether you have the administrator or not has not yielded the result. And it is in those areas where I've suggested in my earlier presentation that maybe we do need to go into a bit more detail on the nature of the problem so that we adapt our support mechanisms and our intervention mechanisms to be responsive to the reality of the situation that we're dealing with. So sometimes it seems, at least to me, that our assessment is broad about the challenges that are there, but we do not get to dig out the most fundamental issues that are affecting that municipality. So we do need to do a bit more than we've done so far, even at the point that the appointed administrator. I believe the first task of that administrator should be to actually then give us the detail of their own diagnosis in detail of the administrative challenges that are faced. Because in that way, your responses are not at a superficial or high level, but rather deal with the detail and the nub of the problem where it is. So I do think that we all agree that we need to improve the way in which we execute Section 139, and that there's a lot more we need to do over and above simply instituting an intervention, which I think Councillor Ngubane is also referring to in relation to how we utilize and deploy Section 154, and by extension, as I said earlier, the district development model as an institutionalized mechanism of support to local government. Now that brings me to the next set of issues. And Chairperson, please excuse me for not accepting the invitation to what almost is a sparring match, a political sparring match, designed in the way in which the questions were asked in certain instances. I think I'll do that because we're designed, at least as I understand from your offices, that this session was designed in such a way that would enable all the participants to contribute, to enable us to think about new solutions and new answers to the problems that we confront. So if I distract the time to entering into a sparring match, I might actually be doing an injustice to the conversation we intended to have this afternoon. So no, it is not big talk. In fact, it is simply a translation of what the constitutional mandate of COCTA is, or what the constitutional mandate of both provincial and national government are. So how do we see the district development model? We always say that it is not a novel intervention. In fact, the district development model, excuse me, is designed such that it takes us to the logical conclusion of what we're designed to achieve. It says, how do we enable integrated budgeting and planning amongst all three spheres and geospatially locate all the interventions of all of government in a space that is a district, and depending on the nature of the dynamics in the space that is the local in that district. So as I said, it's not novel, it is simply about integrating our planning and implementation as we had originally said we would want to do. It is about implementing the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act, which provides that the minister should and can, maybe I should say can in fact, prepare regulations or promulgate regulations to govern intergovernmental relation systems. So through the district development model, the minister would be able to publish regulations that say, this is how we institutionalize intergovernmental relations, so that in fact these bodies that we create are statutory bodies as per the Act itself, the Intergovernmental Relations Framework Act itself. So it's about a logical extension of what the Act seeks to achieve. And I'm saying this to demonstrate the point that we're not trying something novel. We're simply taking forward the mandate of government and the mandate of the department in particular with regards to how we improve mechanisms of cooperative governance, institutionalizing this, and ultimately in terms of Section 154 of the Constitution, providing support to local government. Now, it can't be that in fact we say the idea of supporting local government on its own has limitations. Because it must be that on a daily basis, it is part of our job and responsibility to support local government. And if it is that we institutionalize that support, that we create certainty around the type of support that's being provided, and that we extend the support beyond cooperative governance as a department, beyond Treasury as a department, to all of government. Those economic development departments or economic sector departments to support local economic development in the municipality through the mechanisms, policies, and institutions that they have, it can't on its own be suggested that in fact local government does not deserve that. So I'd like to suggest, Chairperson, that in fact the way we should look at it is about taking the legislation to its logical conclusion and ensuring that the government executes its mandate in line with the constitutional provisions. There's a question around consultants, and I think the Auditor General also touched on this. Indeed, there is concern about the extent to which municipalities should be reliant on consultants for the generation of annual financial statements. And part of the problem that you have there is that by the time you procure consultants to prepare your annual financial statements, the whole system that they are supposed to use to compile those statements has been controlled by somebody else. And unless that system has ensured adequate controls, monthly reporting on your cash flows, on your income statement, on your balance sheet, unless those reports are done on a regular basis, and all the consultants are coming to do is to consolidate and ensure compliance, all you are doing is to ask people to come and interpret records they don't know much about. So the argument is that, in fact, it's important that we get our municipalities to shift the way in which they deploy resources. So the money that they are spending on consultants, shift that money to build capacity in your finance department and in other departments that are critical, asset management, supply chain management, and so on, so that by the time you compile annual financial statements, you've got all the necessary records in place and all the necessary financial statements that you are now consolidating for presentation to the AG. And in that regard, you might not even need consultants. So I think we're all on the same page about what needs to be done with regards to consulting. It's about redirecting the resources to ensure that we create capacity inside. But what are we doing on our side, in line with the district development model, is that in those districts where we've identified this as part of the limitations, part of the resource that we're availing for the municipalities is financial management capacity and resources for them to be able to utilize it, so that they are able to get the appropriate skills that would say to them, but these are the things that you need to do before you get yourself to the point where, in fact, your records are questionable to be able to prepare annual financial statements. So it is that capacity that we're providing to the municipalities to be able to then overcome some of these problems that they're having. I certainly do not think that this is the panacea to all the problems, but I do think that it goes a long way in empowering municipalities to make decisions. Because then in those instances where a municipality, let's say in Waterberg, where a finance person has been allocated, and you find that one of the municipalities, let's say Villavela or Mokopong, are unable to prepare their annual financial statements and are unable to submit on time, as we've witnessed in the past round. We can ask the question, but why didn't you use the resource that was at your disposal? Because the resource was there at your disposal, you didn't have to procure consultants. If you utilize this resource at the beginning, you can then say, but these are my limitations, these are the things we need to do. So that government knows what extra support it is able to give, but also enable you to redirect your resources to deal with the challenges that you have. Honorable Chairperson, there's the point being made about political power play in the implementation of Section 139. I should say that we've made what has so far been anecdotal observations about political power play. And I'm saying it's anecdotal to the extent that we receive reports that certain decisions have been subjective and that such a municipality does not deserve to be under Section 139. My contention, however, is that if in fact, which we, at least on our side, do, and I've made observations of the extent to which NCOP through the Honorable Dodovu and his committee are also doing, are diligent in the way in which we review the submissions for Section 139. In those instances where there's subjectivity, this would not be approved. And there have been instances where we've had engagements with provinces about our view that in fact certain Section 139 are not deserving of implementation. So in instances where there is in fact subjectivity, and if it is brought to our attention, and there's no evidence that in fact such a municipality needs to be placed under administration, then at least members should give us the factual evidence for us to ensure that as we review such an application, because usually we know, because remember that the province institutes and then notifies us that within 28 days you shall respond. So within those 28 days when we get the application, or at least the report that says we've instituted, we have the opportunity to review, and any evidence shared with us would be able to use effectively. I think the point on amalgamations has been made, and yes, Honorable Tutoit, I think we are agreed that in fact we need to oversee even the process of demarcation to the extent that it impacts on the viability of municipalities. Don't support DTM. Okay, no, I'll leave out, as I said earlier, the cynicism and political type of issues.
As you conclude.
As I conclude, Honorable Chairperson, I think it is important to confirm that in fact, as COCTA, we have made a conscious decision that the type of support we provide to municipalities needs to be proactive, and the way in which we write legislation needs to be responsive to the practical realities of what municipalities confront, as we will observe in the introduction of the support, monitoring and interventions bill that we intend to publish for public consultation relatively soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Tau, for your detailed response. The next one is Honorable Dodovu, the chairperson of the Select Committee. Honorable Dodovu.
Yeah, thank you very much once more, Honorable Chair. I'm going to be very brief because I was not confronted by a lot of questions raised by participants. But I just want to talk about the 139 interventions. As we are aware, on Thursday, there's going to be a session in which we are going to engage with 139 intervention, sharing our experiences, our perspectives, and the work that has been done in this particular area. Safe to say that as the NCOP, in May and June, we undertook a rigorous process in terms of Section 139(8) of the Constitution to review all the interventions which were active, about 44, 46 of those interventions. We have done that work, but we are left with the province of the Northwest, where about 13 or so municipalities were placed under administration. We meet in the province tomorrow evening after our session at 6 o'clock to ensure that we complete that work. Once we've done so, we are going to present a report before the House where in which we share our own observations and what is it that we think needs to happen. And I'm going to therefore reserve my comments in terms of the work that we've done preliminarily until on Thursday when we engage with this particular matter of interventions. On the question that Honorable Moimang raised about the practical experiences of the past, especially in relation to the integrated sustainable rural development plan strategy, I know that it was implemented or piloted in the Northern Cape around the year 2000 or so in the Kalahari district municipality, and there was also the Alexandra Urban Renewal Project. I think we need to learn from those experiences. What happened? Are there any successes that can be taken forward? What were the failures, if there are any failures with regard to that? But my critical observation, Honorable Chair, is that we tend to abandon projects, even and programs, even some of them are very, very good. And when we do so, we do not make a proper and objective assessment of those particular projects. And I think these two ones are the cases in point, because for as long as we are dealing with issues of South Africa, we are going to continue to grapple with the issues of rural development and how we must make our rural areas sustainable, viable, economic activity places. So applies to our urban settings. We need to ensure that we draw lessons from what we did in the past. That is my viewpoint. Having said that, just my last words in relation to what I think in practical terms needs to be done. Firstly, I want to submit that political parties must strive to send the best of the best in municipalities. Municipalities must not be the dumping grounds, must not be the theaters where we send people who are inept, who do not have the experience, who lack the ethical and the moral fortitude. And I think as different political parties, in my view, I submit that that can go a long way in terms of attending to the issues that are facing municipalities. But the second point is that I think we must strengthen the role of law if we are to ensure our municipalities are financially viable, ensure that we zoom in our municipalities in terms of dealing with financial malfeasances like corruption, like fraud, like maladministration, and all of that. We need to strengthen the role of law to attend to those particular issues. The other point that I want to bring forward is that we must resist and refuse to bail out municipalities that are not performing very well, as part of the fact that we're saying that we need to support municipalities, but we must not bail out municipalities that are not performing very well, that are rolling over their funds, that are not that are deviating all the times in terms of the legal prescripts. Lastly, in terms of the Auditor General, in terms of the Public Audit Act, I think we must start embarking on issues of recovering the funds directly from the people who are involved. We must attach their assets. We must make sure that those who are corrupt are dealt with accordingly. And if we can do all those sorts of things, in my view, it will be the beginning of fixing the problems of municipalities. And I don't want to indulge in petty issues that, and some of them I feel that were raised here about this is what this one is doing, this what is doing, this one is better, that one is not better than the other ones. Here we are in a platform where we are looking at different solutions to the problems that are afflicting our municipalities. And in my view, I submit that this is what we need to do to ensure that at the end of the day we succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, House Chairperson of the Select Committee, Totovo. I must indicate that when we come together like this and invite different people to come make valuable contribution as NCOP, we stand to gain a lot. And after this week and come Friday, when we engage on a debate, we'll be doing things in a different way because we are learning, and learning is a continuous process. And it's good because beyond the executive and the demarcation board, SALGA, and of course, we decided to extend and invite people that are researchers, experts in their field, so that they can come and reach this process, so that at the end of the week, we're totally different from where we have started. Let me take this opportunity, honorable members and colleagues, and invite our Chief Whip, Honorable Muhai, to come and do the concluding remarks and also do some announcement. Honorable Chief Whip Muhai.
Thank you very much, House Chair. And perhaps I should begin by expressing a word of gratitude to all presenters for sterling presentations, articulating the state of municipalities, the challenges they face, and bringing us closer to imagining strong and sustainable municipalities. Convened under the theme, ensuring capable and financially sound municipalities, these presentations gave an honest account of particular challenges that confront local government and move a step further to clarify key interventions that are necessary to turn things around in our municipalities. Local government remains a critical sphere of government, placed at the cutting edge of service delivery and interface with our communities. And so better communities will be born out of stronger and solid local government. The chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Tate Masondo, did a brilliant work by foregrounding our discussion, kickstarting our discussions for the week. And Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has implored us to refrain from a blanket approach which treats municipalities as if they are similar, that we need to establish a framework that deals with local and district municipalities in accordance to their particular challenges, with a view of helping struggling municipalities and place them on the same level as bigger municipalities. I believe that the keynote address of Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma will serve as a reference point as we proceed to our second day tomorrow in discussing the situation, the state of local municipalities. But we are also particularly encouraged by the example that was placed forward by the Minister of reimagining Waterberg municipality, putting people first, focus on priorities that matter the most, that we should aim at creating fundamental change in terms of altering the situation as it exists now. Resist the tendency of soft, modest targets, but to challenge ourselves for higher performance culture, all of us. And by so doing, we will be really aimed at producing very groundbreaking results. And we must appreciate the input of the minister. And also we appreciate the president of SALGA, who expresses sincere expectation that this local government will provide the much needed solutions which are credible and sustainable for the benefit of both municipalities and communities they serve. And SALGA correctly knows that the focus must be given to political governance challenges, strengthening of leadership and oversight, solidifying impacts for greater impact and consequence management, improving regulatory framework to allow smaller and rural municipalities to attract skilled administrators for greater output, and review of the vertical allocation of resources. I believe that this is measure for further discussions as it has been flagged. And the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Masondo, took us through the features of developmental state, the centrality of accountability to avoid poor financial decisions and deal with corruptions decisively. The Deputy Minister acknowledged the need to improve funding model to help municipalities, especially small and rural ones, but equally express the necessity to work with what we have by avoiding minimizing bad financial decisions. So we have to deal with these issues. Like Auditor General did not only focus on challenges that municipalities face, but provide proactive intervention that need to be urgently affected to restore full functionality and efficient local government. Among others, he highlights that encouraging municipalities to fully exploit all sources of revenue to meet their development objectives in planning, ensuring the services are provided at all levels, putting at the heart of municipality productivity the issue of planning to curb even unnecessary failures in the municipal system. And much as the Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs took us through history of local government to highlight the evolution of this sphere and appreciate the progress the democratic government has made. Among other things, the Deputy Minister make a case for Parliament to give adequate support to municipality to ensure financial viability, improving intergovernmental monitoring and support, and create a conducive and enabling regulatory framework for municipalities to perform maximal. And then lastly, our chairperson of the Select Committee, Comrade Dodovu, who successfully carved out the critical area of oversight and utility of Parliament that is efficient and uncompromising in ensuring our people get what they deserve, a better life for all. So a strong, solid Parliament that is able to sustain its oversight will result into good governance and deal with the constraint of bad decisions across all spheres of government. So this was a meaningful first day, I must say, honorable members. And all of us, we should appreciate the presenters to remain in focus on our theme to ensure that at the end, we are able to say that we have built solid foundation to ensuring capable and financially sound municipalities. I'll end by saying, House Chair, thank you very much for job well done, yourself and the Deputy Chairperson who have been managing the sessions today with much more dignity that it deserves, that our House deliberate in a focused manner on the issues at hand. Tomorrow is dedicated largely to provinces. We want to hear the input of provinces. All MECs for local government are expected. In some other instances, other MECs for finance will be joining their colleagues. It is expected tomorrow that we deal adequately with these issues in terms of support that is given to municipalities so that we have a comprehensive picture on issues at hand. So those that will be presenting are requested. The system will be open as early as 8:30 in the morning. The better we log in early, also technical matters are taken into consideration in terms of ensuring that uniformity, that it is Parliament in session or the National Council of Provinces as one of the houses of Parliament. So those matters will be taken care of, particularly the presenters and the rest of special delegates. Thank you for job well done for our first day. Let's meet tomorrow. Thank you very much, House Chair.
Honorable, thank you, Chief Whip.
Thank you, Chief
Colleagues,
Whip.
tomorrow, don't forget, we are using the very same link of today. There won't be any new link to be sent to you tomorrow. We're using the same link. Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, all of you. It's then adjourned now. Thank you.
Thank you, Baba.
Thank you, House Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chair.